Jan. So we'll start with Jan.
Well, good morning. I'm Representative Jan Angel. Okay. I'm Representative Jan Angel, and yes, I'm running for the state senate. This is probably my 6 eggs and issues with you, so I'm going to go a little different direction this morning. I want to share with you why I have the passion that I do to do this job. I was raised in a family where my dad was a mail carrier and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and they used to joke about having maybe $5 between the two of them when they were married. But they had a work ethic. And I remember them saving money and buying a couple acres, and we farmed that land and actually took the money from the crops and we would put it on the mortgage. So I learned at a very early age the value of this mortgage for our home. And since I was the oldest, I guess you could say that I was my father's son, because I worked right alongside with my dad. I nailed subfloor sheetrock, Celotex, laid a roof, and even laid bricks. That home was very important to my family. And today, we have people that have had their hours cut, they have lost their jobs, and they've lost their homes and are in the process of losing their homes as we speak. You know, when Mom was in, we were doing a crop of carrots, and Mom was 9 months pregnant, and she'd set the carrots on her tummy and wrap them. Well, she went into labor up in the field. And my dad and I took her to the hospital. She had my baby brother. We came back to the field, and she finished that crop. And I remember her saying to me, when you've got a job to do, find a way to get it done. Well, we've got a job to do. We've got 243,000 people out of work in this state. And you are the way to get it done. Our local businesses, we got to get government off your back so that you can retain and to create the jobs that you're supposed to. Get our folks back to work, because if we do that, we'll have that disposable income, that income that then provides for state government, local government, that helps us pay for education and transportation and taking care of our most vulnerable. So we've got a job to do. I know what we got to do, and I commit to you today that I will partner with our local businesses to get the job done. Thank you.
Well, good morning all. I'm Senator Nathan Schlicker, and it's great to be here with you. It's actually wonderful to be back here. I grew up actually about a mile from here, and my parents still live in the home, so it's nice to come home. You know, I got involved in Olympia this year as your state senator because I'm passionate about changing the culture down there. 2 years ago, I saw real problems. I saw career politicians tell me as an ER doctor that chest pain and seizure and coma and 700 other things were not an emergency, all in the name of saving a dollar, putting people's life at risk. And so I spent 2 years of my life changing that law, repealing that law, making a better plan, and in the end, saving you $30 million a year. And so I realized then that we needed at least one doctor in Olympia. I've since come to realize it's probably a psychiatrist, but you know, it's a whole nother problem. But we really need to get down there. We need people that have knowledge about healthcare as we roll out the Affordable Care Act. But it goes beyond that. It's also education that I'm passionate about. You know, I've got 3 kids. My oldest is 4.5, and in a year he's going to be going to public school. And I'm proud of the public school education I got here in Central Kitsap as a high school graduate, and at the University of Washington in law school and medical school. I want my kids to have that public education system. But we've seen the destruction that Olympia has done. They played kick the can to the tune of $5 billion that they have underfunded our system. But more importantly, they failed to focus where the jobs of tomorrow are at. They failed to get us looking forward at the global economy. Bremerton has taken that first step with their science, technology, and engineering and math, STEM Academy. We need to refocus our state on that because we need to get our kids ready for the global economy. It's my kids and their generation that will be the first true competitors in the global economy from day one when they graduate. We need to make sure that they're ready. But we also do need to work to get people back to work and get Olympia focused on keeping your jobs and, well, not their own. At the end of the day, I'm a small business owner. I know the struggles of what our small business is going through. I've seen the challenges of regulation. I know, well, the joys of the B&O tax regressive structure that hurts our small businesses. It's broken, and we can do better for you. And we need to bring that citizen perspective back to Olympia. It's time to start to change the culture in Olympia. We need to stop kicking the can down the road, and we need to get to work. We need Olympia working for you. And we need them to realize that that means also getting done on time, so that we have a budget, so that we can give to our schools, so that they can make their budgets and plan for their year with you. It means getting people out of there and not incentivizing them to stay longer. No pay for special sessions. And it means also changing that culture of obstruction and partisanship. And that's what I've done as an ER doctor and a healthcare advocate, and what I'm committed to doing as your senator, as I did this year. And I look forward to working with you on getting Olympia back to work.
All right. So the first question is going to go to Nathan since Jan started.
Okay.
Do you see a state income tax in our future?
You know, I don't see a state income tax in our future. I think the voters have spoken quite clearly about that repeatedly. And I think that if there's ever going to be anything, it's going to be a grand compromise that has to come about. We do have real challenges, folks. We have the world's, or this, not the world at least, but the 50 states' most regressive tax structure in the state. If you make less than $20,000, you pay upwards of 20% of your income in state and local taxes. If you make above $100,000, you pay less than 4%. That's not a flat line, that's a pretty steep line. If we got everybody just paying the national average on their state taxes based upon income, 80% of Washingtonians would pay less. We need to fix the tax revenue structure in the state and make it fair. But I'm not certain the state income tax is the solution that Washingtonians want. But I think the one thing we can all agree is that the current system isn't working for everybody.
No, I do not see a state income tax, and I'll tell you why. If you analyze all the different states in our country that have a state income tax, it is so oppressive on local business that it hurts them. And do we have the perfect tax system right now? No, we do not. Do we need tax reform? You bet we do. When we have those of you paying B&O tax on your gross receipts without taking into consideration any of your expenses, that's a problem. I've had my own girls, Kara and Erin, come up to me and say with their business, Mom, if we could just pay our business and occupational tax on our net income, we might be able to take more of a paycheck home. And there's times they don't even get to take a paycheck home. Our tax system needs to be fair, and if we're going to lay out any kind of new regulation, then we've got to make sure for our business people to create the jobs, those regulations create the results we're looking for to get the jobs.
All right. So back to you, Jan. Can we improve transportation in this state without a 10-cent gas tax increase?
You know, at this point, we've got to improve the transportation. We have congestion problems. You don't have a strong economy if you can't get your products to market. We know that mobility is a critical issue. Over in Pierce County, we know that Highway 167 is crucial that we get that done. But what we have to look at is if we're going to put money into transportation, two things. We got to reform our transportation system before we fund it. And then when we do start to fund a project, we got to make sure that that project's going to give us a return on our investment for our economy. Right now, we've got leaky pontoons over in Seattle costing us another $288 million. We have ferries that list. We have roads over in Pierce County, 3 highways coming up with 2. How in the heck does that happen? Reform it, and then we'll fund it.
And I agree, we need to get reform done. But we need to do less talking about reforms and actually doing it. And that's what I did this year as your senator. I went through the tolling division's budget, and I saw that there was unnecessary spending there. And we cut 20% out and saved you $3 million this biennium. I also did the same thing in ferries. When I walked in as a freshman senator a week after session started, we were still living with the Gregoire budget that said we needed $6 million in service cuts, because that was efficiency. I'm sorry, but service cuts are not efficiency. Efficiency is doing more with less. So I sat down with WSF and I said, we're going to find the savings in your budget. And we did. And we preserved the service so that there is still a ferry run after 9 o'clock here in Bremerton. So when we talk about fixing it, we need to do that. But we need people that are dedicated to do that hard work, that are going to make sure that we reform it and not just talk about it, that we're going to get things done, and then we fund it, because there are important needs. We here in Bremerton know that you need ferry service. The south part of our district knows we need to fix the tolls, and we need to do job creation issues like 167 and the Belfair bypass that will put people back to work.
Thank you. So back to Nathan. Tell us your position on cancer care in the state budget.
So your position on cancer care. Well, you know, I think when we talk about that, I think what you're getting at is the issue of what role does government play in making sure that people have access to health care benefits. So I think also what you're driving at is that there was a bill introduced 2 years ago that Representative Angel sponsored. That's a big difference between us. It was a bill that stripped out over 90 mandates on preventative screening. It said that no longer would the state decide, no longer would citizens advocate for mammogram screening, prostate cancer screening, autism screening, fetal ketonuria, and about 90 other things that people care about. So we would leave it to the federal government and to large insurance companies to decide on. And I don't believe that's right. I believe in local control, and citizens have spoken up and said that those things matter to them, and they want them covered by insurance companies in the state. We should be doing that. We should be doing what citizens ask. We should be making sure that people get basic preventative screenings. As an ER doctor, I know that. Because I know that it's great to talk about prevention, but when we have over 1 million Washingtonians without access to care, that's not prevention for everyone. So let's get there and get it done.
I'm glad that you asked that question, because I've been accused of taking cancer screenings away from women in mammograms. When I ran for the House of Representatives, I think it was Steve Gardner called and he said, "You seem to be dragging your feet about announcing for office." Well, I was, because it was October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I had just had a surgical biopsy, and my doctor thought I had breast cancer. Praise God, I was one of the lucky ones, and I didn't. But do you think that I would ever take any kind of a cancer screening away from any woman or anyone? I lost my mother to ovarian cancer. I lost my cousin Jeannie to breast cancer. She left a 6-year-old daughter and a husband. Doesn't make sense. We do need to provide our health care, but we've got to be able to give choices. And when you talk about the bills, you better read the entire bill, because some of these health care bills mandated that we pay for abortion, each one of you, in addition to your regular health care premium. That's what I voted against.
Thank you. So back to Jan. How do you feel about the citizens legalizing pot in our state? Do you think this will cause more problems for our law enforcement, or will it bring prosperity?
It's going to cause problems. It already is. I was in a national conference, and Colorado was in they were looking at legalizing marijuana, and they had just done that. And I spoke to one of their senators, and she said to me, unless you have a process totally laid out, you're going to have a problem. She said, we come up with so many unexpected consequences, and see, that's happening to us right now. If the federal government says it's illegal, is it even still legal in this state? I have 2 grandsons that are state troopers. They're struggling right now with what is the definition of impaired. We're going to have problems with this. It's already done, so we better work it out the very best we can to not only protect our people, but to put a system into effect. I think we're going to tweak it over and over again, and I think it's going to be a long haul.
So as a physician, I do have real concerns with the marijuana initiative. And I really worry about the impact on our kids when we've got another addictive substance out there. But the voters have spoken, and our job is to implement the law, and we will do that. It is going to take serious work. But not only are we going to tweak it, I hope we do one important thing. When this initiative went through, it talked about getting help for chemical dependency treatment. It talked about making sure there were dedicated funds to do addiction treatment for not only marijuana, but other issues. And my real fear is that in these budget times where we're playing kick the can down the road, more of our career politicians are going to take that money out of addiction treatment, out of that initiative, and put it somewhere else. The reality is that Washington State is far behind the curve. We have very little in the way of addiction treatment and mental health treatment, which often run together. And we need to make sure that that funding stays in place and that it's not another budget gimmick and sweep into our general operating funds, but we keep it for what it was dedicated for.
All right, back to Nathan. Please tell us the depth of your experience and local community involvement.
So, my experience in Olympia has been as a citizen, much like you. I went down when this ER issue came up, when chest pain was declared not an emergency, and I spent 2 years of my life working across the aisle with both sides. I met with Republicans and Democrats, and one of the greatest compliments of my career was when I decided to do this and become your senator. I talked with Derek Kilmer, our former state senator, and Derek said, "It sounds like a great idea. I only have one question for you. Are you a Republican or Democrat?" And I said, "I happen to be a Democrat." He goes, "Oh, I could never tell when we met, because we were so focused on the issues and working on finding a solution for everyone." And I think that's what we need more of. We need people that have experience working across the aisle and have gotten things done, and not just talking about bipartisanship. And this year, again, as your senator, I've worked across the aisle. Believe it or not, I voted with the majority Senate leader, who happens to be a Republican, 95% of the time. We worked across the aisle to do things together, and we disagreed on important things, but I've proven an ability to work across the aisle, and that's what we need to do. That's the experience we need, and that's the leadership we need in Olympia.
I think the question here was community involvement. I've been involved in this community for, gosh, over 30 years now. I've served as the president of the Port Orchard Chamber of Commerce and was a 13-year board member. I'm a member of this chamber, the Gig Harbor Chamber. And with my businesses, when I was a business owner and I had multiple locations here in the county, I belonged to 6 chambers of commerce all at one time and was active in all of them. I'm a Rotarian. I've been active with my kids' foster care programs that they work to actually raise money for foster care children. I've worked on Habitat for Humanity, and I went out and I nailed sheetrock there as well. I've been involved in the community for 30 years, and I've given back because I love doing that, and I look forward to still doing it as you're elected.
All right, so back to Jan again. What can you do to bring back jobs to Bremerton?
I want to bring back jobs to everybody. As I said to you, we have 243,000 people out of work, and that number may not even be accurate, because with a lot of the reporting that comes through, I found that there's a lot of folks that have used all of their unemployment, and that number, the numbers you see in the paper for unemployment percentages, may be 6% higher than what we think they are. So what are people doing out there? First of all, as I stated, you've got to get government off your back. If you're going to do regulations, make sure it's not just for process. Or if you're going to do a new regulation, make sure it's not just to gain more revenue. And I've seen that happen over and over. This last year, there were 11.5 pages, single line, front and back, 11.5 pages of new taxes and fees. And honestly, that's why we were there for another 60 days, is because we had to stand strong to make sure that didn't happen. And it didn't. There were new fees and taxes on every industry you could possibly imagine. Hair care, your dry cleaner, your dentist. Who do you think is going to pay for that? All of you with the same salary.
Thank you.
So I actually have a plan on how to get people back to work here, and in Bremerton, it's really simple. It starts with keeping our naval base here. I grew up in this town, and I remember from the blip of a moment we were on a BRAC list, and the fear that put in our community. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again. And if you've been listening to the national press, you've heard the Secretary of Defense saying that we have 1 to 2 rounds of base realignments and closures coming up. Bremerton cannot be part of that. That means that Olympia needs to invest in our naval base. It needs to invest in the military. When Boeing talks about moving a production out of Washington State, we bend over backwards in Olympia. When the 4th largest employer in this state, the military, talks about base closures, you hear crickets. Well, I went down this year and made sure that we focused on retaining our bases. Got investments in the Burwell Street Tunnel, and started to address some of the safety concerns. Worked to get funding for the Missouri Gate commercial truck exit, which is important to the military for the long-term viability of our bases. That's the leadership we need to actually work to find solutions to keep our naval base. Secondarily, though, we need to make sure we're working with our small businesses and with the KEDA, Kitsap Economic Development Association, and other groups to promote our region, to draw businesses here so that we don't have strip malls that are empty like this, but that we promote urban development again.
All right, back to you, Nathan. What can be done at state level to help Bremerton reduce its problems with hypodermic needles on our streets and in our parks?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question. And it goes back to the comment I made earlier, that we need to make sure we're addressing chemical dependency in this state. As an ER doctor, I treat patients every day that have challenges with chemical dependency. Some of them finally want to get help, and there's very little resources out there for them. There are very few beds, there are very few providers that provide treatment for chemical dependency, and there's very few resources to do that. We need to make sure we're getting people addiction help. We need to make sure that we have safe drop-offs for hypodermic needles and give people sharps bins if they're using, because I'd rather make sure that they're throwing away the needles and leaving them on the streets where kids can get access to them. We need to make sure, though, that we're treating the entire patient and getting addiction treated in this process. It's not just about the needles, but it's about the person that's using the needles and making sure that we get them out of that cycle.
I worked on this very issue as your Kitsap County Commissioner, sitting as chair of the Public Health Board. This is a problem in this area, and yes, I'll tell you, when you're out doorbelling, one of the things you hear over and over, drug addiction has hit every home. Everyone knows someone who has an issue there. That's why I ran a bill that would have required drug testing at the recommendation of a social worker before our families got TANF, which is temporary assistance to needy families. I wanted to make sure, first of all, that we're feeding families and we're not feeding a drug habit. If there is a user then in the family, we can get them help. We can get them back on the track, and we can get them back being a productive citizen, being able to go back to work and to get that job. And I've worked so closely with Kitsap Mental Health over many, many years. It's a huge issue. We don't properly fund our mental health system, and drug addiction must be addressed. It's an epidemic for it.
All right, back to you, Jan. What legislation have you written since being in Washington Congress?
Okay, we're not in Congress, are we? All right, in the State House, this last session, the way I have structured my bills is I have a district office that's open 5 days a week over in Bremerton. On the interim time, I still work full-time as your state representative. This last year, I took any issues that were coming in from my constituents that had problems, bills that had errors in them, and I ended up with 18 bills that I prime-sponsored to be able to fix errors in the law or to correct problems. And one of those that I think is very important to you as business owners was an error come up in the law where it showed that if you are a small business owner and you are a corporation, even if you're a 1 or 2 person corporation, if you went, I had a lady here in Port Orchard, set her business aside, went to work for somebody else, got laid off, and she had, I'm not going to get to finish, she had no unemployment because she was a small business owner. I got that bill changed, it passed this year.
Thank you.
So the way I write legislation and work on issues is based off of talking with my constituents, my patients, and with all of you. And we've already got a number of them in the works for next year to address issues like conversion from being a corpsman in the military into an LPN, working to address unemployment insurance issues for staffing companies, and a number of others. But this year I also worked on things that obviously I knew a little bit about when it came to healthcare, addressing the diabetes epidemic, working to work on the prescription monitoring program to treat chemical dependency, working with the American Heart Association on CPR education in our schools. And the key thing is that the bills that we come up with are from good organizations here in Washington, and they're not from large out-of-state special interest groups. And one of the bills that Representative Angel just talked about was drug testing welfare recipients, and that's actually a model piece of legislation from a large organization called ALEC, which does not represent, I think, Washington State. The challenge with that bill is that it says, as funding is available, we'll provide chemical dependency treatment. As we talked about, there is no funding for chemical dependency treatment in this state. So it's kind of like saying, we'll offer you help right as soon as we get around to funding it. It's not a solution.
Okay. So, next question. Do you support the rights of working men and women to bargain collectively?
I do. I think we need to get everybody ahead. We need to make sure that we're getting living wages for people and making sure that families are able to support themselves. The reality is we have real challenges right now with living wages. We've grown out of this recession with jobs, but with part-time jobs with minimum wage. That's not a solution to our long-term growth. People often talk about minimum wage as a temporary stepping stone, that it's only for those that are under 25. The reality is less than 1 in 5 of the people on minimum wage is under the age of 25 anymore.
Yeah.
This is the challenge we have, folks. We need everybody to have a living wage. We need everybody to have the opportunity to take care of their family. It used to be that one parent could provide a living wage. Now it takes 2, often sometimes with multiple jobs. So I do support the rights of workers to make sure that they can fight for a living wage. You're darn right.
I see nothing wrong with collective bargaining when you can sit down with the employer and the employees and work out a plan that's best for both of them. That's a win-win for everybody. I do want to set the record straight on ALEC. ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. I have never brought any bill forward that is a model bill for ALEC. The only bill in the state of Washington that I know of that has come forward with an ALEC model legislation bill is the governor's climate change bill that was recently signed into law. Now, ALEC, you're going to hear a lot about that. I belong to all the other organizations as well, NCSL, CSG, and I'm on CSG's task force. I'm on ALEC's Economic Development, Business and Commerce. I'm a NCSL, I worked on low-income family housing. So I belong to all of those groups. So why are we just hearing about one with model legislation? You know, if it is a model bill and it's passed through the committee process, through the House, through the Senate, through that committee process, and signed by a governor, maybe it's a good bill.
Thank you. So back to Jan. If you believe there are tax loopholes in the state budget, which would you propose closing?
Okay, one of the things I did is I sat down, because you hear tax loopholes all the time, I sat down with our former auditor, Brian Sonke. Brian did a full review, and they do this frequently, going through what is called loopholes or tax incentives. Now, somebody's loophole is somebody else's job. So you've got to be very careful on when you look at these. If these incentives are set out with a sunset, then let's look at them to see, did it serve its purpose? Did it create jobs? Should it be sunsetted or should it be extended? So with that review, the auditor went through and made recommendations on bills that should be sunset and bills that should continue forward. When he did that, that study went to what we call JLARC, which is a committee of both Republicans and Democrats that then make the decisions on where that should go, what should be cut, and they bring it to us for a vote.
The challenge we have is that there are over 1,100 loopholes. And JLARC doesn't review all 1,100 every year.
No.
We need to get to doing a serious review on the loopholes and the incentives that we have, because I support small businesses and making sure we get jobs. But if those incentives aren't getting us jobs, then they're not helping us. And they're making the problem worse, because it's taking money out of our other small businesses. It's saying that when the state had a challenge 2 years ago, they came to you, the small business owners, rather than closing those loopholes that weren't doing anything for us. I also don't think it's important that we talk about one of the big loopholes that we closed this year. We closed the estate tax loophole that made sure that married couples were treated the same as individuals, and that the voter-approved initiative, the voter-approved law, stayed intact when the court blew a hole in it called the Bremerton decision. I voted to make sure that we kept $150 million in our education system, in the legacy of trust account, and not send it back via the estate tax loophole that was created, because I believe we need to put our children first. That's the difference between Representative Angel and I, is that we voted differently. I voted for that loophole closure, she voted against.
Okay, back to Nathan. Can you help provide support to our passenger ferry, and why are we increasing fares 2% when passenger load is going up?
So the challenge we have is our overall ferry funding structure. Every year we make a significant transfer out of the gas tax fund to fund our ferries, because we don't have a stable funding ferry source. We don't have really any for our passenger-only ferry service. That's the challenge we have. Remember, when I started this year, we were faced with $6 million in service cuts. And we need to find savings to preserve that. The reality is that our costs are going up as fuel goes up, as we're trying to modernize our fleet, because we have one of the oldest fleets in the world. Most other places have a 30-year ship life, average lifespan. Ours is over 50, folks. We saw that challenge when the rhododendron had a hole in the hull. That's not a pragmatic way to do business, to wait until you're literally rusting a hole and then pay 3 times the cost to emergency build a ship to get things done. So I'd like to see us provide funding for passenger and ferry service if it works, if it makes financial sense, and I am supportive of it. But we've got to work to fund the entire ferry system and get a stable source, not just passenger-only ferries.
The passenger-only ferry isn't under the state purview. It's under our county and is run under Kitsap Transit. I sat on the board for Kitsap Transit for 8 different years, and I believe this is where it needs to be for right now, because our transit agencies have the availability to get federal money and state money, and that little passenger ferry between Port Orchard and Bremerton, I think, is vital to both of our communities. I rode it this weekend back and forth to the Blackberry Festival, and it was full every single run. I sat down with the city of Port Orchard recently to try to figure out where can we get other additional revenue to put toward that little passenger ferry. We're looking at some taxes coming out of rental car income that comes from tourists coming to our area. We're looking at a number of different ways that we can take existing resources to channel toward those little passenger-only ferries to keep them running, because they are vital to our community.
Okay, back to Jan. How have you voted to fully fund education post-McCleary decision?
Okay, I've been involved in education a long time before I got into politics. And the first year that I was elected to the House of Representatives, I worked on, you heard it, fund education first. If we go to Olympia and we take the one mandate that is in our Washington State Constitution, which is to fully fund education, there's only one, then let's fund education first. Let's put that budget together and let's get it passed and through the process and take the politics out of our children and our grandchildren's education. This last year, we offered a fully balanced fund education first budget at the end of February. What happened? It was presented to the governor. Well, I'll tell you what, when we got into a special session, that budget became very important and much of that was used. Why didn't we use it back in the end of February and March? We could have.
So I think you've asked a great question, how are we going to fund it? And you've just heard one of the differences between us. I voted to close the loophole to keep $150 million in our education legacy trust account. That's a clear difference, because we can talk about priorities, but the problem is there's not one constitutional mandate. Education is not the only one. If you've been following the news, there's a lawsuit in Pierce County that says that our failure as a mental health system, because we rank 51st in the country, 51st in our bed availability, and in our treatment of mental health diseases, that we have failed in our constitutional obligation. There are equal constitutional lawsuits out there about access to justice, about timely and speedy trials, and the right to confront your accuser based upon lack of resources. So there's not one constitutional mandate. The state is required to do more than one thing. It's required to address public safety. It's required to fund courts. It's required to do education, and mental health is part of that. Those are real things that we have to fund, and we can't just pretend like there's a list and we draw a line. I'm sorry, but we can't just stop doing public safety or stop doing healthcare to fund education. We need to do it all, but we need to do it by making it smarter, efficient, and reformable.
All right. So, do you support a change to the state constitution to make 2/3 vote to increase taxes to the law of the land?
I do, and I've said that actually since day one, since I've been down there. I know that there's been some, we'll call it misleading information out there. But while I have concerns about it, I understand the will of the voters. They have voted nearly 70% in our district to support a 2/3 majority rule, and I support it as your senator. I hope, though, that we can tailor it to make sure that it's operationalized in a way that works, and that we tie it to fixing our long-term problems with our tax structure. I hope we do a grand bargain that solves our problems and stops the aggressive nature and allows us to be on a stable platform. So we're not coming back trying to decide what's a loophole, what's this, what's that. And I also hope that when we talk about a 2-3 rule, we're not talking about loophole closures in there, because we've seen that with over 1,100 of them, some of those do need to go away. And I don't think we should get that bogged down in this kind of an issue. We need to make sure that we're being efficient and we're getting rid of loopholes that are not helping small businesses.
I absolutely support the 2/3 because you gave me those marching instructions through citizen initiatives time after time after time. And here we go again, taking the will of the people and throwing it away. And I really take difference to my opponent saying that he supported that in the Senate. You did not. This district passed 70%, by 70% that initiative. And it is the will of the people, but we keep flipping it every single time. We are not listening to you. And this constitutional change would put that into effect to where it can't be flipped every 2 years like it is right now. It's wrong.
Okay, so back to Jan. What are the differences between you and your opponent?
The differences, oh wow, where do you start? I believe experience. Experience. I've had a very vast experience of all kinds of different industries. I've been in banking, construction, insurance, real estate, owned my own business, then 8 years in county government, 5 years here in the House. Out of 5 sessions, I've done 13 sessions already. You see a pattern going on here? Lifetime experience. I've gone through some really tough times. Many of you know that when I owned my own business, my husband took his life. I had 2 children in college. I had what Mom said come back to me saying, when you got a job to do, find a way to do it. I did. And I've been successful at every single venture I've ever taken on. I'm very proud of that. And I'm honored to be able to stand in front of you and say, I've walked in every pair of shoes any woman has ever walked in.
I think we bring a difference in perspective. You know, I look at the world through the lens of my patients, through my kids, and through my everyday citizens. And just like Derek Kilmer, I'm trying to bring the citizens back to Olympia. And I respect my opponent's service. I appreciate her 13 years. But I think we need to get the citizens back into Olympia. We need to get the idea that everyday people are serving us, not people who have forgotten, I think, sometimes what it means to serve, that take pay during special sessions that they've had. I don't think that is something that you figure out in your 13th year. That's something I figured out on my first day. I think, you know, you also need to look at where our focus is. My focus is on serving you and actually delivering results for you. It's great to talk about efficiencies and savings. It's another thing to deliver them, folks. And that's what I've done as your senator. I did it last year as a citizen, saving you $30 million a year. That's pretty good for any elected official. I think it's pretty decent for a citizen. I've also worked to find you savings this year as your senator. Results matter at the end of the day. And I challenge my opponent to actually tell us what efficiencies and savings she's actually done. It's a great talking point, but results matter.
All right, back to Nathan. Do you support criminalizing abortion even in cases of incest and rape?
No, it's that simple. You know, women who are raped and who have been the subject of incest should have the right to determine their own body. That's a violation that as a physician I've cared for too many rape victims. I've seen too many people suffering. And to talk about criminalizing abortion in that instance, to talk about criminalizing or not providing Plan B to a woman who's gone through one of the most traumatic experiences of her life is just wrong. You know, it's a tough issue we have. But let's work to address the crime of rape and incest, not punish the woman who's the victim of that crime.
You know what? That is a very personal decision. And that decision should be made between the woman and her doctor and her conscience. The law stands as it is, and I raise my hand to support the laws of the state of Washington and the federal law every time I'm sworn in. I take that very seriously. Criminalization, I can't make that decision. There is not a bill out there right now to consider that. And that's a very personal decision that I couldn't make for any of you, nor would I want to. That's between your doctor, the woman, and the law.
Right. Back to Jan. What makes you qualified to be the, quote, small business candidate? What makes you qualified to be the small business candidate?
Well, because I've owned a lot of small businesses. First of all, the first business that I owned, I was 15 years old. I lived in a very rural area, and I needed a way to get some money to buy a car. And I started a business that ran for all the time that I was in junior high and high school. And I was making $10 an hour way back then. And I didn't know that they called that being entrepreneurial or owning a small business. My husband and I owned a property casualty insurance company. I was a licensed insurance agent, an employer. Here in Washington State, I own 4 different locations. Started out as a national franchise, and then I defranchised and did my own thing so that I could provide more for my 54 employees. I know how difficult it is to keep those doors open because I've walked in your shoes. I've had to call the janitor and say, I can't afford you anymore, so I'm going to have to let you go. And I did that work myself. I know what it's like as a small business person to live within your means.
Thank you.
You know, I've held a lot of jobs over my lifetime, even as short as it may be thus far. Hopefully a little longer one. You know, I've worked here at Illahee Manor at one of our local bed and breakfasts as a farmhand. I actually worked with McDonald's here on Wheaton Way when I was a kid. I've been a telemarketer working for Pacific Lutheran University, my undergraduate. I've been an intern and everything else in a law office. And now as a physician, I own my own small business, Schlicker Physician LLC. So, I know the challenges we have, folks. I see it every day. I came back here after doing residency to Gig Harbor and set up in 2009, in the height of our recession. And in 2011, I got the little gift of the increased B&O tax. I know the challenges that small businesses have, and I'm committed to working on them with you to improve our regulations, to improve the B&O tax structure that is equally as regressive as our personal income tax structure, our personal tax structure for our individuals. And let's start finding solutions. Let's start getting the work done and not just keep kicking the can down the road so that businesses have a fighting chance, and that our small businesses that provide 70% of our jobs in our communities actually get a leg up.
All right. So how would you characterize your top financial supporters in terms of why they want you in office?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I've got a broad coalition of supporters. One of the funniest comments came, who would have ever thought that the trial lawyers would be working with the doctors, working with the laborers, working with the environmentalists? You know, we pulled together a coalition of people that see a difference. They see support of a candidate that wants to change the culture in Olympia and wants to get rid of the career politicians. They see a candidate that's done a decent amount of things in his first 30 years and has a lot of potential and upside. And I think those people are supported because they believe that we need to have at least one doctor in Olympia to help guide some of the biggest changes in our healthcare. Right now, folks, I'm it. I'm sorry. You know, the second thing, we need to work with education. I'm proud to have supported a lot of teachers and the Education Association. And we need to get people back to work and have living wages. And I've got support from small businesses as well as from workers from across the state. And that's what I'm proud of. It's a coalition of many different groups, and a lot of them that don't always get along so well. But it's a testament to the vision we have.
Well, this is where we have a big difference because my opponent is supported by all of the unions except one, and that's the state troopers who have 100% endorsed me. And I get criticized for having big corporations. My opponent owns a corporation. These are business people that actually have stepped forward with all different varied industries like the ones I've talked to you about. I've been an insurance agent. I have insurance support. I've been in construction. I have construction support. I have all kinds of folks, and I'll tell you what, hundreds of thousands of dollars from $2 all the way up. And one of those, let me tell you about a little guy named Felix, because Felix on the report said 2.50. Thought it might have been $25, so I wanted to verify that with him before I put the report in. And Felix said to me, yes, the amount is correct. That's all I have to give, but I want to support you. That's what this job is about. It's about the Felixes of the world.
Thank you. So, kind of a long question. The federal government seems to be increasing its interventions and interference in local education matters, including areas of student testing, teacher evaluations, use of state and local funds. Recently, the federal government has threatened to withhold funding if the legislature doesn't change the law regarding testing and evaluations. Do you support this level of federal involvement in education, and please explain your answer?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure what they're referring to other than possibly Common Core. Common Core is a standardized type of education system that hopefully is going to elevate our folks and standardize between state to state to state. There's advantages and disadvantages. When this was brought to education, and I've sat on 2 years of early learning and children's services, I've sat on 2 years of education policy, and I've sat 2 years on higher education. While I was on the Education Policy Committee, Common Core came forward as a bill, but it's so new that I have real concerns about it. It's very, very expensive. The technology that must be put into effect is very, very expensive, and I'm not sure how we're gonna pay for that. Hopefully, it did pass. We've got to make sure that as it goes into effect, we can keep sustainable, because we've got to get our kids above the average in math. South Kitsap, Bremerton, we're under 50%.
I believe in local control, and I hope that our state can lead and can work with the feds to get waivers as needed when there are onerous federal regulations. But I really think we need to talk about where we're going in education. It's not just about who's regulating, who's in control, it's about what the vision is. Where are we putting our money, where are we putting our dollars, and what are we doing to use them efficiently for you in Olympia? Science, technology, engineering, and math are STEM education. There's a reason you keep hearing it. It's because it's our future. We should be hiring kids from Bremerton, not from Boston and Bombay to fill our high-tech jobs. But we're not doing that because we're not investing in STEM enough. This year there were 2 bills that work to focus both our K-12 as well as our higher education system on STEM education. Both those bills left the Senate unanimously with my support. Unfortunately, my opponent voted against them. You know, we need to get focused on where our education system is going, and Washington State needs to lead. That will get the focus in the right place, and that will allow us to do a waiver with the federal government to get the right thing done for you.
All right. So this question tends to come up every week. We'll start off with Nathan. Can you say something nice about your opponent?
Yes. You know, I appreciate her service and her work in the community. You know, it is important. You know, and I respect that service. I am ready for a change, but the good news is that in this instance, you can actually keep both of us, since Representative Angel will still be in the House should I win. So I can still honor that service and appreciate it, even though I disagree with where you're going. But I do appreciate the time and the commitment.
And I really appreciate the value of Nathan being an ER doctor. I think it's a very special skill when you can go in and save someone's life. And I'm thrilled. I've heard some of the stories about the children we've saved, and I think that's awesome. And it's a special skill. But government isn't just one skill, and I think that's a crucial point that you do need to remember.
All right, back to Jan. What is your first goal when you are elected?
Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I meet with constituents. In fact, when I leave here today, I have an appointment over at my district office to meet with a woman to discuss the disabled child that she has and problems she's having there. And I'll tell you what, working with our disabled kids, working with our VOTECs, I've been honored by these different associations to be named Legislator of the Year for our disabled kids, Legislator of the Year for our VOTEC, those kids that aren't going to be able to go to four-year colleges. VOTEC is critical. We need diesel mechanics at the shipyard. We need mechanics at all of our car owners. We need people to cut our hair. Our community colleges, I worked hand in hand with them, because those are the foundations that will help retrain the people I talked to you about that have been laid off or trying to find a job. These retraining programs are critical. I've had 2 meetings in the last 2 weeks with TCC over in Gig Harbor. They need to expand. Want to keep doing what we're doing and get more of it done.
And I think this is one of those differences, again, that you see. I think we fundamentally need to change the culture in Olympia. The culture of obstructionism and partisanship, it needs to change, folks. And then one of the first things I'm going to do is make sure that we work to make sure that you don't get paid during special session. If you can't get the job done on time, you shouldn't get paid. It's that simple. The second thing we need to do is make sure that we're working across the aisles. As I mentioned, I've done that as a citizen and as your senator, and I'm honored by that. I'm honored to have had good relationships, co-sponsored bills with my Republican colleagues, and I continue to do that. I'm going to help solve the problems that businesses see using my expertise as a physician, seeing things from a different lens. And when we talk about some of the challenges for small businesses in L&I, we can save more money, folks, for you in L&I by working on the initial intake of patients into the L&I system than we ever can by talking about compromising the release at the end. Why don't we focus where the savings are? Let's get back focused on where the results are at, where the savings are at, and not just on what makes great headlines. That's what we need to do, is change the culture of Olympia.
All right. So we'll do one more question, then we'll do the wrap up. We try and finish up by 8:30 to respect everybody's time. So kind of a long one. It seems like every citizen is demanding more of our government. Every government program is demanding more money. How do we balance this problem and do it in a budget? What is the government's role?
I think okay. I think the government's role is to find that balance. And it's not to make rank lists, but to look at each program and decide if there's a value there for the citizens and if it's something that you've supported. It means not cutting services that you value. Things like support for healthcare issues and prevention. Things like public safety and access to our courts and improving our mental health system. I understand the concerns of people that, there's people with their hands out, but the reality is there are people that are working on elevating their station in life, and I'm amazed the number of times I go to somebody's store and they say, when I got unemployment helped me save my house to be able to get back to work, and now I have a job, I'm able to keep my house, I'm able to keep my kids in that house that we grew up in. Those are the stories of the things that government does that we don't hear enough about. And we need to make sure that every time we talk about a program, we're tying it to a real return on investment for you, that it's really a program that's working, and that's what I'm committed to doing. I have a great feedback mechanism in the ER, because the reality is I see people from all walks of life, from the homeless man on the street to the CEO of a corporation, and I know the challenges they face, and I'm excited to continue to serve to find a balanced budget that works for all of our citizens.
First of all, you have to determine what is it that government should do, and you lay those things out. You determine what are the priorities. And yes, in a job description, I read my job description as an elected. First of all, we need to fund education. We do have the responsibility of the health and safety of our people. So we have, whether that is emergency management, whether it's law enforcement, priority. Do we have a moral responsibility to take care of our most vulnerable citizen? You bet we do. Whether it's the senior, the disabled, or a child that truly cannot take care of themselves. In order to do that, you have to lay out what those priorities are. You tie those to the revenue forecasts that are coming into the state, so you know how much money you had. This last session, we started with $2 billion more in revenue. $2 billion more. And yet, we still were asking for 11.5 pages of new taxes and fees.
All right. Now, you each get 2 minutes to wrap it up. We started off with Jan at the beginning, so I think it's a start for this 2 minute call.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, especially this early in the morning. I really appreciate it. It's been great to have a conversation about where we're going as a state. I got involved because I'm passionate about us looking at Olympia a little bit differently and changing that culture. I believe that we need to focus on education for your kids as well as mine. That means funding it, but getting us refocused on STEM education. That is so critical, folks. It's about the global economy, and we have got to get our kids ready. And there is no time for delay. 2018 is too late. We need to get working today. But we need to also make sure that people are healthy and able to go to work. As we roll out the Affordable Care Act, I said it in the beginning, I'll say it again. We need at least one doctor there to make sure that we're doing it in a patient-safe way. Patient-safe way. Chest pain is an emergency. And the fact that we have people down in Olympia that don't understand that frightens me. It should frighten you. We need to be responsible, and we need to make sure that Olympia has the knowledge that it needs. We also need to get you back to work, which means addressing the challenges we have in our E&O tax structure and making it more fair, addressing the regulations that challenge you, and allow our small businesses to flourish. But I go back to the end of the day, we need to change the culture in Olympia. The status quo is unacceptable. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, Einstein said it best. That's the definition of insanity. We need to change what we're doing, folks. We need to change the culture of partisanship. We need to change the culture that it's okay to take pay during special sessions. We need to change the culture that we're there only to make the other guy look bad, and get citizens back into Olympia. Get everyday people that understand the challenges, that, in my case, take care of patients, or cut their hair, or 1,000 different things, and have that feedback every day with you as citizens. Because the only time you see us shouldn't be at a forum or in our office. It should be out in the community, and it should be, at our jobs, where we work in the community to serve you. And that's what I'm committed to doing. It's changing the culture in Olympia and bringing the citizen perspective back. Thank you.
Well, we agree on one thing. We do need to change the culture in Olympia. We've been under one-party rule for so long that we don't have a lot of bipartisanship. And I'll tell you what, with this last year, it was a whole new ballgame. We had a Senate Majority Coalition that actually put together a budget where people had to talk to each other. And that budget had no new taxes, put $1 billion into education, and balanced a budget based on the revenue that they had. No 11.5 pages of more taxes. That's what brings people together, that kind of balance. And I want to help make that happen. You've heard, I've been a problem solution person my entire life. And the areas that I've worked in, I think, are very important to you in my life experiences. I've been in banking for 14 years. I owned an insurance company, licensed insurance agent. I worked as a chief financial officer in a big construction company, and was the liaison between management and their labor union. I came to Washington State and I ran my own business for 9 years, and it wasn't easy. I've shared some of those things with you. From there, I went into real estate, and I studied land use and property rights, and that's when I was asked to run for Kitsap County Commissioner. As a commissioner, I sat on 24 different boards: emergency management, transit, mental health, public health. And now as your state representative for the last 5 years, I've sat on multiple committees, and I've been successful there as well. It's my honor. It is my honor to work and to serve you. And I ask you to send me back to the Senate, or to the Senate this time, because as Mom said, when you've got a job to do, you gotta get it done. And I do know how to get it done. Thank you so much.
All right. Round of applause for our We have an addition to our Eggs and Issues forums. Next week, we're going to have Bremerton School District. Allison Rotter and Wendy Stevens will be here next Tuesday. So please come join us then, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
Bye-bye.